The Orion Fringe wasn't a place for the squeamish. Dexter had learned that lesson years ago when he'd first ventured into these lawless asteroid fields, chasing salvage and credits with equal fervor. Now, at 32, he'd made peace with the endless dance between risk and reward that kept his patched-up freighter, Stellar Wisp, running and his belly full. "Another day, another derelict," he muttered, running calloused fingers through his tousled black hair as he studied the scanner readouts. The asteroid belt stretched endlessly before him, a graveyard of ships that had met their end in pirate raids or navigational miscalculations. Each wreck was a potential gold mine, if you knew how to extract the valuable components without triggering any nasty surprises left behind by previous owners. His sharp green eyes caught something unusual on the display. Not the typical debris signature of a destroyed vessel, but something else entirely. A faint, pulsing signal buried in the electromagnetic noise of the asteroid field. Dexter leaned forward, his worn leather jacket creaking as he adjusted the scanners for a better read. "Well, I'm shocked," he whispered, his cocky grin spreading across his weathered face. The signal was coming from what appeared to be an escape pod, and not just any escape pod. The energy signature was unlike anything in his extensive database of human tech. This was alien, sophisticated, and most importantly, still active. Common sense told him to keep flying. Alien tech meant alien problems, and alien problems had a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention in the Fringe. But something else stirred in his chest, that same restless empathy that had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count. Someone was inside that pod, and if the life support readings were accurate, they didn't have long. "Ah, hell!" Dexter sighed, already adjusting his course toward the signal. His hands moved with practiced precision across the controls, years of salvage work having honed his piloting skills to a razor's edge. The Stellar Wisp responded like an extension of his will, its jury-rigged engines humming as they navigated through the treacherous asteroid field. The pod came into view through the reinforced viewport. Sleek, organic-looking, nothing like the boxy human designs he was accustomed to. Its surface shimmered with an iridescent quality that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the distress beacon. Dexter's breath caught as he realized just how beautiful the thing was, even damaged as it appeared to be. "Okay, beauty, let's see what you're hiding," he murmured, bringing the Stellar Wisp alongside the pod. The docking procedure was tricky. The pod's design was clearly intended for vessels he'd never seen before, but Dexter's ingenuity had never failed him yet. He improvised a connection using salvaged coupling rings and a healthy dose of creative problem-solving. The airlock cycled with a hiss, and Dexter found himself staring into an interior that took his breath away. The pod's walls curved organically, embedded with what looked like living circuitry that pulsed with soft, bioluminescent light. And there, secured in a restraint system that looked more like art than engineering, was its occupant. She was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Tall, elegant, with skin that seemed to glow with an inner light, pearlescent and beautiful in a way that made his mouth go dry. Her silver hair cascaded around her shoulders in loose waves, and even unconscious, there was something regal about her bearing. The tattered remains of what must have been elaborate clothing clung to her slender form, hinting at status and wealth. But it was the failing life support systems that snapped Dexter back to reality. Warning lights flashed urgently throughout the pod, and he could see the atmospheric readings dropping toward critical levels. Without hesitation, he dove into action, his hands working quickly to assess the damage and jury-rig a solution with the tools and components he always carried. "Come on, sweetheart," he muttered, splicing power cables and rerouting life support through his own ship's systems. "Stay with me here." As the atmosphere stabilized and the warning lights dimmed, she stirred. Long lashes fluttered open to reveal the most striking violet eyes Dexter had ever seen, large and luminous, currently filled with confusion and wariness. "Who? Where am I?" Her voice was soft but carried an unmistakable note of command, the kind of tone that suggested she was accustomed to being obeyed. Dexter sat back on his heels, wiping grease from his hands on his jacket. His cocky grin returned as he met her gaze steadily. "Name's Dexter. You're currently aboard my ship, or at least docked to it. Found your pod drifting in the asteroid field with failing life support. Good thing I happened along when I did." She tried to sit up, her movements graceful despite her obvious disorientation. As she did, Dexter noticed her skin's glow intensifying slightly, as if responding to her emotional state. Fascinating. "I am Princess Lirien of the Vaelari Empire," she said formally, her chin lifting with unconscious pride even in her weakened state, "and I was abandoned." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with pain and betrayal. Dexter felt something twist in his chest at the vulnerability he glimpsed behind her regal facade. Whatever had happened to put a princess in a failing escape pod in the middle of nowhere, it wasn't good. "Well, Your Highness," he said, his tone gentler than his usual casual quips, "looks like your abandoning days are over. Question is, what do we do now?" As if in answer to his question, the Stellar Wisp proximity alarms began to wail. The alarm's shrill cry cut through the still moment like a blade. Dexter's expression shifted instantly from gentle concern to sharp focus, his body tensing as he moved to the pod's small sensor array. His fingers danced across controls that should have been alien to him, but his years of salvaging had taught him to adapt to any technology quickly. "Pirates," he growled, reading the sensor data. "3 ships, heavily armed, closing fast on our position." His green eyes flicked to Lirien, who was struggling to stand despite her obvious weakness. "They must have been tracking your pod's beacon." Princess Lirien's skin flickered with a brighter luminescence, betraying her fear despite her composed expression. "The Korthak Syndicate," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "They serve my brother now." "Your brother?" Dexter's jaw clenched as he helped her to her feet, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle against her glowing skin. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through both of them, her luminescence flaring, his pulse quickening at the warmth of her. "Prince Valdris staged a coup 3 cycles ago," she explained, her voice growing stronger as anger replaced fear. "He had me exiled, cast out in this pod to die slowly in the void. The pirates, they're here to ensure I never return to reclaim my throne." Dexter's protective instincts flared. Something about this ethereal princess, her courage in the face of betrayal, the way she held herself with dignity even in her tattered state, called to something deep within him. "Well, they'll have to go through me first." Before Lirien could respond, the Stellar Wisp shuddered as enemy weapons fire bracketed their position. Dexter was already moving, his lean frame coiled with urgent energy. "We need to get you aboard my ship. This pod won't survive another hit." He guided her through the makeshift airlock, his hand on the small of her back, feeling the heat that radiated from her glowing skin even through the fabric of her torn garments. The sensation was intoxicating, but survival took precedence over the unexpected attraction crackling between them. The Stellar Wisp's bridge was a stark contrast to the organic beauty of the Vaelari pod. All function over form, cramped and cluttered with salvaged equipment and jury-rigged systems. Lirien looked around with wide eyes, clearly fascinated by the organized chaos that somehow worked perfectly under Dexter's command. "Hold on, Princess," Dexter said, dropping into his pilot's seat with practiced ease. His hands flew over the controls, bringing the freighter's engines online with a roar that vibrated through the hull. "This is going to get rough." The first pirate ship opened fire just as Dexter threw the Stellar Wisp into a spiraling dive between 2 massive asteroids. Lirien gasped and grabbed for support, her fingers inadvertently closing over Dexter's shoulder. The contact made his skin burn with awareness, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. "How can you navigate through this?" she asked, her violet eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration as he threaded the freighter through a gap that seemed impossibly narrow. "Experience, instinct, and a healthy disregard for the laws of physics," Dexter replied with a grin that didn't quite hide the concentration in his green eyes. He pulled the ship into a sharp turn that should have torn it apart, using an asteroid's gravity well to slingshot them toward a cluster of debris. What he did next would have been considered impossible by most spacers. Using nothing but visual navigation and his deep knowledge of the Stellar Wisp's capabilities, he guided them through a maze of spinning rock and twisted metal that would have destroyed a less skilled pilot. The pirate ships, larger and less maneuverable, were forced to take longer routes around the obstacles. Incredible, Lirien breathed, her skin glowing brighter as excitement replaced fear. Her people valued control, order, predictability. Dexter's chaotic improvisational style was everything the Vaelari considered primitive about humans, yet she couldn't deny its effectiveness. A proximity alarm chimed, and Dexter's smile turned predatory. "Time for a little human ingenuity," he said, his fingers working over a jury-rigged control panel. "See, Princess, the thing about scavenging is you learn to use everything, even the stuff that doesn't look useful." He triggered a sequence he'd programmed months ago, and suddenly the debris field around them came alive with energy. Old ship batteries, still holding charges, discharged in a coordinated pattern that created a web of electromagnetic interference. The pirate ship's sensors were blinded, their targeting systems disrupted. "Impossible," Lirien whispered, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on his arm. The contact sent heat shooting through both of them, her glow intensifying where their skin touched. "The probability calculations alone—" "Humans don't do probability," Dexter said, his voice rough with more than just the strain of piloting. The feel of her hand on his arm, the warmth of her presence beside him, was making it hard to concentrate. "We do impossible." As if to prove his point, he executed a maneuver that used an asteroid's rotation to catapult them clear of the debris field, leaving the confused pirates far behind. Only when they reached the relative safety of empty space did he allow himself to truly look at her again. Lirien was staring at him with an expression of wonder that made his chest tight. Her skin had settled into a steady, warm glow, and her silver hair had come loose from whatever restraints had held it, framing her face in soft waves. She was beautiful in a way that made his mouth go dry, but it was more than that. There was intelligence in her violet eyes, strength in the set of her shoulders, and something that looked suspiciously like desire in the way she was looking at him. "That was," she began, then seemed to lose the words. "Just getting started," Dexter said, his cocky grin returning as he met her gaze. The tension between them was palpable now, crackling in the small space of the bridge like electricity before a storm. Their moment was interrupted by the soft chime of an incoming transmission, one that would change everything. The transmission cut through their charged moment like ice water. Dexter's expression hardened as he recognized the encryption pattern, pirate military channels. He gestured for Lirien to remain quiet as he opened the audio feed. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Gorvac of the Syndicate Fleet," came a gravelly voice, speaking in heavily accented galactic standard. "You are harboring stolen property of Prince Valdris. Surrender the female and you may depart with your ship intact." Dexter's jaw clenched, his green eyes flashing with anger. Without hesitation, he opened a return channel. "This is the Stellar Wisp. The lady is under my protection. You want her, you'll have to come through me." He cut the transmission before they could respond, leaving silence hanging in the cramped bridge. Lirien stared at him with an expression of shock and something that looked suspiciously like awe. "You would risk your life for me?" she asked softly, her skin pulsing with a warm, golden light. "You don't even know me." Dexter turned to face her fully, his weathered features serious. "I know enough. I know you didn't deserve to be thrown away like garbage. I know you've got more courage in your little finger than most people have in their entire bodies." He paused, his voice growing rougher, "and I know that anyone who would abandon someone like you doesn't deserve to rule anything." The intensity in his gaze made Lirien's breath catch. Her people prized emotional control above all else, yet this human's raw honesty was more compelling than any carefully crafted Vaelari rhetoric she'd ever heard. Her skin brightened involuntarily, betraying the effect his words had on her. "I thank you," she managed, her formal composure cracking slightly, "but you don't understand the danger you've placed yourself in. My brother has allies throughout the sector. The Syndicate is only the beginning." "Then we'd better make sure they can't track us," Dexter said, already moving toward a control panel. "Welcome to the Stellar Wisp, Your Highness. She's not much to look at, but she's home." For the first time, Lirien really looked at her surroundings. The ship was a study in controlled chaos, every surface covered with salvaged equipment, jury-rigged modifications, and personal touches that spoke of years of solitary travel. It should have felt cramped and claustrophobic compared to the vast, pristine spaces of the Vaelari royal palace. Instead, it felt alive, warm, real in a way that her former life had never been. "It's remarkable," she said honestly, running her fingers along a console that had clearly been assembled from a dozen different sources. "How do you keep track of it all?" Dexter's cocky grin returned. "Practice, and this." He tapped his temple. "Human brains are wired for pattern recognition and adaptation. We're scavengers by nature. We take what works and make it better." As if to demonstrate, he began showing her around the small ship. The cargo hold had been converted into a workshop, filled with salvage components organized in a system that made sense only to him. The galley was tiny but efficient, equipped with a food processor that had been modified to handle a dozen different species' dietary requirements. Her quarters, his quarters, he corrected, since he'd be taking the floor, were sparse but comfortable, with a viewport that offered a stunning view of the stars. "This is where you jury-rigged the life support connection," she observed, examining the tangle of cables and adapters he'd used to save her life. Her fingers traced the improvised connections with something approaching reverence. The probability of success for this configuration should have been less than 12%. "Like I said," Dexter replied, moving closer to examine his handiwork, "humans don't do probability." The proximity was intoxicating. In the confined space of the ship, she could smell the scent of him, metal and leather, and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken. When he reached past her to adjust a coupling, his arm brushed against hers, and she felt electricity shoot through her entire body. Her skin blazed with light, betraying her reaction. Dexter's breath caught as he noticed her glow intensifying. "Does that hurt?" he asked softly, his calloused fingers hovering just above the luminescent skin of her arm. "No," she whispered, her violet eyes locked on his. It's how my people show emotion. We're taught to control it from childhood, but around you I find myself unable to." Her words trailed off as he slowly, carefully, let his fingertips brush against her glowing skin. The contact was electric, sending shockwaves through both of them. Lirien's eyes fluttered closed, her head tilting back slightly as sensations she'd been trained to suppress flooded through her. "You're incredible," Dexter murmured, his voice rough with desire, "like touching starlight." The spell was broken by the harsh wail of proximity alarms. Dexter jerked away, his professional instincts overriding his personal desires as he rushed to the bridge. Lirien followed, her skin still glowing with residual heat from his touch. "3 ships closing fast," he reported grimly, his hands flying over the controls. "They've found us." "I'm sorry," Lirien said, guilt evident in her voice. "This is my fault. I should never have—" "Hey!" Dexter's voice was firm but gentle as he looked at her. "None of this is your fault. You didn't ask to be betrayed by your own brother." His expression hardened with determination. "But I swear I won't let them if I let them finish what he started." His fingers danced over a control panel that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and wishful thinking. "Time to see if this old girl has any surprises left in her." "What are you doing?" Lirien asked, moving to stand beside his chair, her hand unconsciously coming to rest on his shoulder again. "Rigging a decoy," Dexter explained, his concentration absolute despite the distraction of her touch. "We drop a beacon programmed to mimic our engine signature, then shut down all non-essential systems and drift like debris. With any luck, they'll chase the decoy while we slip away." It was another impossibly risky plan that should never have worked. The stellar wisp went dark just as the pirate ships entered sensor range, drifting among the asteroids like just another piece of wreckage. Lirien held her breath as enemy ships passed within mere kilometers of their position, following the false signal deeper into the asteroid field. "Brilliant," she breathed, her admiration evident in both her voice and the soft glow of her skin. Dexter's smile was answer enough, but the look in his green eyes promised that their adventure was just beginning. Hours passed in the strange quiet of the darkened ship. With all non-essential systems powered down to maintain their deception, the stellar wisp drifted silently through space. Emergency lighting cast everything in red shadow, creating an atmosphere that was both dangerous and oddly romantic. Lirien found herself studying Dexter as he worked, cataloging the way his calloused hands moved with surprising delicacy over sensitive controls, the furrow of concentration between his dark brows, the unconscious grace with which he moved through his domain. Everything about him was so different from the rigid formality of Vaelari court life, raw, real, and utterly compelling. "Tell me about your brother," Dexter said quietly, not looking up from the sensor readouts he was monitoring. What made him think he could get away with this? Lirien was quiet for so long he began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and heavy with pain. "Valdris was always ambitious, but I never thought we were close once. He used to say that I was the only one who truly understood him." Her skin flickered with dim blue-tinged light. Sadness, Dexter realized, learning to read the emotional language of her luminescence. The sight of her pain made something twist in his chest. "Power changes people," he offered, his voice gentler than his usual casual tone. "Perhaps, or perhaps it simply reveals who they truly were all along." She moved closer to where he sat, drawn by the warmth of his presence. "The coup was swift, brutal. He had allies I never suspected, nobles who smiled at me during court functions while planning my destruction." Dexter's jaw clenched. "And they just threw you out to die?" "Not at first." Lirien's glow shifted to an angry orange-red. "First there was a trial, a mockery of justice where I was accused of treason against the realm. When I refused to abdicate willingly, they sentenced me to exile in the void, a slow death meant to send a message to any who might oppose the new regime." "Son of a—" Dexter caught himself, remembering he was talking to royalty. Though given everything she'd been through, he doubted she'd be offended by a little rough language. A soft chime from his communications array interrupted them. Dexter frowned, checking the source. It was a tight beam transmission, heavily encrypted and coming from— His face went pale. "What is it?" Lirien asked, noticing his sudden tension. "It's a message from the pirates," he said grimly, "but not on any channel they should know about. This is a frequency I only share with friends." He activated the message, and a familiar voice filled the small bridge, older, smooth, with the practiced charm of a seasoned merchant. "Dexter, my boy, I hope this finds you well. I'm afraid I have some rather unpleasant news. It seems our mutual friends in the syndicate are looking for a certain Vaelari princess, and they're offering quite a substantial reward for information about her whereabouts. Now, I know you've always been principled about these things, but surely even you can see the wisdom in being practical. The girl is already dead politically. Why not profit from the inevitable?" The message continued with coordinates for a meeting and promises of shared wealth, but Dexter had stopped listening. His hands were clenched into fists, his green eyes blazing with a fury that made Lirien take an involuntary step back. "Marcus," he said through gritted teeth, "that backstabbing—" Marcus Varen, human merchant, operates in the outer systems. I've done business with him for years, thought he was. Dexter's voice trailed off as the full implications hit him. "A human traitor, working with your brother's allies." The words hung between them like poison. Lirien stared at him, her violet eyes wide with shock and something that looked suspiciously like suspicion. Her skin had gone dim, almost gray, the Vaelari equivalent of going pale. "Your own kind," she whispered. "Humans are helping to hunt me." Dexter felt his heart sink as he saw the doubt creeping into her expression. After everything they'd shared, all the trust they'd built, was she going to lump him in with Marcus's betrayal? "Lirien, I swear to you, I had nothing to do with this," he said urgently, rising from his chair to face her. "I would never—" "How do I know that?" she demanded, backing away from him. Her skin was flickering now between gray fear and red anger. "How do I know this isn't all an elaborate deception? Perhaps rescuing me was part of the plan all along." The accusation hit him like a physical blow. Dexter felt his own anger rising. After everything he'd risked for her, everything he'd given up, she could still doubt him? "You want to know how you know?" he said, stepping closer, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I'm still here. Because when they offered me a way out with my ship and my life intact, I told them to go to hell, because I'm looking at you right now instead of figuring out how to hand you over for the bounty." He took another step, closing the distance between them until they were mere inches apart. This close, he could see the rapid pulse at her throat, the way her luminescence flickered like a candle in the wind. "And because when I look at you," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I don't see a political problem or a source of profit. I see someone worth fighting for." The intensity in his green eyes was overwhelming. Lirien felt her breath catch as she stared up at him, seeing nothing but raw honesty in his weathered features. Her trained diplomatic instincts warred with the intuition that had kept her alive through palace intrigue for years, and her intuition was telling her to trust this man. I'm sorry," she whispered, her skin gradually warming back to its natural pearlescent glow. "The betrayals, the constant danger, it's difficult to know who to trust." "Trust this," Dexter said softly, reaching up to cup her face in his calloused hands. The gesture was gentle, reverent, as if she were made of spun glass. "I will never let them hurt you. Not Marcus, not the pirates, not your brother. Never." The moment stretched between them, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with her alien biology. Lirien felt herself leaning into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as sensations she'd been trained to suppress flooded through her. When she opened them again, the heat in his gaze made her pulse race. Then the ship shuddered under weapons fire, and reality crashed back in around them. "They found us," Dexter snarled, releasing her and spinning toward the controls. The sensor display showed 3 ships closing fast, and this time there was nowhere to run. "Hold on, Princess," he said, his hands flying over the controls as he brought the Stellar Wisp's defensive systems online. "Time to show these fools what human ingenuity looks like when it's properly motivated." As alarms wailed and the ship bucked under enemy fire, Lirien found herself thinking that she'd never been more terrified, or more alive, in her entire life. The Stellar Wisp shook violently as another salvo of plasma fire scorched past her hull. Dexter's hands danced over the controls with desperate efficiency, coaxing every ounce of performance from his battered freighter. Emergency klaxons wailed through the corridors, red light bathing everything in an apocalyptic glow. "Shields at 30%, he shouted over the noise, pulling the ship into a spiraling, evasive maneuver that should have torn her apart. "These guys aren't playing around." Lirien gripped the back of his chair, her knuckles white, her skin blazing with anxious golden light. Through the viewport she could see their pursuers, sleek, predatory vessels that moved with the deadly grace of natural killers. But it wasn't the ships that terrified her most. "There," she gasped, pointing at the sensor display. "That ship, the configuration is Vaelari, my brother's personal guard." Dexter's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. "So this isn't just about the bounty anymore. This is personal." Another impact rocked the ship, and sparks flew from an overloaded console. The lights flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, the engines sputtered. But the Stellar Wisp held together, barely. "Can we fight them?" Lirien asked, though she already suspected the answer. 3 against 1 with military-grade weapons against a salvage freighter? Dexter's cocky grin was strained but still present. "Not directly, but humans don't fight fair." His fingers flew over a control panel that looked like it had been assembled from 10 different ships. "Remember what I said about using everything? Time for the Wisp to show her teeth." What happened next defied every principle of conventional space combat. Instead of running or fighting, Dexter did something completely unexpected. He flew straight toward the largest asteroid in the nearby field, one that sensors showed was riddled with unstable metal deposits. "Are you insane?" Lirien demanded, her skin flaring bright white with terror. "Probably," Dexter admitted, his concentration absolute as he threaded the ship through a gap barely wider than her hull. "But insanity is just another word for thinking outside the box." The pursuing ships followed, confident in their superior firepower and maneuverability. What they didn't expect was for Dexter to suddenly reverse thrust and fire his makeshift weapons, not at them, but at the asteroid itself. The impact destabilized the ore deposits, creating a cascade of explosions that turned the entire asteroid into a massive fragmentation bomb. The lead pirate ship, caught in the blast radius, simply vanished in a ball of superheated plasma. The other two were badly damaged, their pursuit effectively ended. "Impossible," Lirien breathed, staring at the destruction through the rear viewport. "The calculations alone." "Stop trying to calculate human behavior," Dexter said with a grin, wiping sweat from his brow. "You'll give yourself a headache." Their celebration was short-lived. The communications array crackled to life, and a familiar voice filled the bridge, smooth, cultured, speaking in perfect galactic standard. "Very impressive, Dexter," came Marcus Varen's voice. "Though I have to say I'm disappointed. I thought you were smarter than this." The viewscreen flickered to life, showing the interior of what was clearly a much more luxurious ship. Marcus Varen sat in an expensive chair, his graying hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate. But it was the figure standing beside him that made Lirien gasp. Tall, elegant, with the same pearlescent skin and silver hair that marked him as Vaelari nobility. But where Lirien's luminescence was warm and vibrant, his was cold, dim, the glow of someone who had chosen darkness over light. "Cousin Thalon," Lirien whispered, her voice heavy with betrayal. "Hello, dear cousin," the Vaelari noble said, his voice carrying the musical quality of their species, but none of its warmth. "I must say you look worse for wear." Dexter felt Lirien tense beside him, her skin flickering between rage and pain. He reached out without thinking, his hand covering hers where it gripped the chair. The contact seemed to steady her, her glow warming slightly at his touch. "So," Dexter said, his voice dangerously calm, "let me guess, you're the inside man, the one who helped plan this whole thing." Marcus chuckled, the sound sending ice through Dexter's veins. "Inside man? My dear boy, I prefer to think of myself as a facilitator. Prince Valdris had certain needs regarding his sister's permanent removal from the political sphere. I simply helped connect him with like-minded individuals." "Like-minded individuals who happen to be human," Dexter said, his jaw clenching. "You sold out your own species." "Species?" Marcus laughed outright. "Dexter, you always were too sentimental. There are no species in business, only opportunities. The Vaelari Empire controls 47 star systems and some of the richest mining operations in the galaxy. Prince Valdris needed human contacts to help destabilize certain trade routes, and I needed access to Vaelari technology markets. It's simply good business." Thalon spoke up, his cold eyes fixed on Lirien. "My dear cousin, this human has done you no favors by prolonging your suffering. Surrender now, and I promise your death will be quick." "Never," Lirien said, her voice carrying the full authority of her royal training. Her skin blazed with defiant light. "I am the rightful heir to the Vaelari throne, and I will see both you and my brother answer for your crimes." "Brave words from someone in a damaged freighter with nowhere to run," Marcus said smoothly. "Dexter, be reasonable. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and, frankly, out of your league. Help us end this, and I'll make sure you receive a substantial compensation for your inconvenience." Dexter was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes unreadable. Lirien felt her heart sink as she wondered if he was actually considering the offer. But when he finally spoke, his voice was steady and absolutely certain. "Marcus," he said calmly, "you can take your offer and shove it up your exhaust port." The communications link cut to static, leaving them alone on the bridge. Lirien stared at him, her violet eyes wide with something that looked like awe. "You could have been rich," she said softly. Dexter turned to face her fully, his weathered features serious. "I've got everything I need right here." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Without conscious thought, she moved closer, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat through the worn fabric of his shirt, strong and steady and utterly human. "Dexter," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotions she'd spent a lifetime learning to suppress. He reached up to cup her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs tracing the delicate curve of her cheekbones. Her skin blazed with warmth where he touched her, painting them both in soft golden light. "I meant what I said before," he murmured, his voice rough with desire. "I will never let them hurt you." The space between them seemed to disappear. Lirien found herself pressed against his chest, her hands fisting in his shirt as she looked up into his green eyes. The heat building between them was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Raw, desperate, utterly consuming. Then the ship's sensors chimed with an incoming transmission, and the moment shattered like crystal. "This is Captain Gorvac," came the pirate's gravelly voice. "We have you surrounded. Surrender the princess, or we will take her from your wreckage." The stellar wisp shook violently as another salvo of plasma fire scorched past her hull. Dexter's hands danced over the controls with desperate efficiency, coaxing every ounce of performance from his battered freighter. Emergency klaxons wailed through the corridors, red light bathing everything in an apocalyptic glow. "Shields at 30%, he shouted over the noise, pulling the ship into a spiraling evasive maneuver that should have torn her apart. "These guys aren't playing around." Lirien gripped the back of his chair, her knuckles white, her skin blazing with anxious golden light. Through the viewport, she could see their pursuers, sleek, predatory vessels that moved with the deadly grace of natural killers. But it wasn't the ships that terrified her most. "There," she gasped, pointing at the sensor display. "That ship, the configuration is Vaelari, my brother's personal guard." Dexter's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. So this isn't just about the bounty anymore. This is personal. Another impact rocked the ship, and sparks flew from an overloaded console. The lights flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment the engine sputtered. But the stellar wisp held together, barely. "Can we fight them?" Lirien asked, though she already suspected the answer. 3 against 1, with military-grade weapons against a salvage freighter? Dexter's cocky grin was strained but still present. Not directly, but humans don't fight fair. His fingers flew over a control panel that looked like it had been assembled from 10 different ships. "Remember what I said about using everything? Time for the Wisp to show her teeth." What happened next defied every principle of conventional space combat. Instead of running or fighting, Dexter did something completely unexpected. He flew straight toward the largest asteroid in the nearby field, one that sensors showed was riddled with unstable metal deposits. "Are you insane?" Lirien demanded, her skin flaring bright white with terror. "Probably," Dexter admitted, his concentration absolute as he threaded the ship through a gap barely wider than her hull. "But insanity is just another word for thinking outside the box." The pursuing ships followed, confident in their superior firepower and maneuverability. What they didn't expect was for Dexter to suddenly reverse thrust and fire his makeshift weapons, not at them, but at the asteroid itself. The impact destabilized the ore deposits, creating a cascade of explosions that turned the entire asteroid into a massive fragmentation bomb. The lead pirate ship, caught in the blast radius, simply vanished in a ball of superheated plasma. The other 2 were badly damaged, their pursuit effectively ended. "Impossible," Lirien breathed, staring at the destruction through the rear viewport. "The calculations alone." "Stop trying to calculate human behavior," Dexter said with a grin, wiping sweat from his brow. "You'll give yourself a headache." Their celebration was short-lived. The communications array crackled to life, and a familiar voice filled the bridge, smooth, cultured, speaking in perfect galactic standard. "Very impressive, Dexter," came Marcus Varen's voice. "Though I have to say I'm disappointed. I thought you were smarter than this." The viewscreen flickered to life, showing the interior of what was clearly a much more luxurious ship. Marcus Varen sat in an expensive chair, his graying hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate, but it was the figure standing beside him that made Lirien gasp. Tall, elegant, with the same pearlescent skin and silver hair that marked him as Vaelari nobility. But where Lirien's luminescence was warm and vibrant, his was cold dim, the glow of someone who had chosen darkness over light. "Cousin Thalon," Lirien whispered, her voice heavy with betrayal. "Hello, dear cousin," the Vaelari noble said, his voice carrying the musical quality of their species but none of its warmth. "I must say you look worse for wear." Dexter felt Lirien tense beside him, her skin flickering between rage and pain. He reached out without thinking, his hand covering hers where it gripped the chair. The contact seemed to steady her, her glow warming slightly at his touch. "So," Dexter said, his voice dangerously calm, "let me guess, you're the inside man, the one who helped plan this whole thing." Marcus chuckled, the sound sending ice through Dexter's veins. "Inside man, my dear boy, I prefer to think of myself as a facilitator. Prince Valdris had certain needs regarding his sister's permanent removal from the political sphere. I simply helped connect him with like-minded individuals." "Like-minded individuals who happen to be human," Dexter said, his jaw clenching. "You sold out your own species." "Species?" Marcus laughed outright. "Dexter, you always were too sentimental. There are no species in business, only opportunities. The Vaelari Empire controls 47 star systems and some of the richest mining operations in the galaxy. Prince Valdris needed human contacts to help destabilize certain trade routes, and I needed access to Vaelari technology markets. It's simply good business." Thalon spoke up, his cold eyes fixed on Lirien. "My dear cousin, this human has done you no favors by prolonging your suffering. Surrender now, and I promise your death will be quick." "Never," Lirien said, her voice carrying the full authority of her royal training. Her skin blazed with defiant light. "I am the rightful heir to the Vaelari throne, and I will see both you and my brother answer for your crimes." "Brave words from someone in a damaged freighter with nowhere to run," Marcus said smoothly. "Dexter, be reasonable. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and frankly out of your league. Help us end this, and I'll make sure you receive a substantial compensation for your inconvenience." Dexter was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes unreadable. Lirien felt her heart sink as she wondered if he was actually considering the offer, but when he finally spoke, his voice was steady and absolutely certain. "Marcus," he said calmly, "you can take your offer and shove it up your exhaust port." The communications link cut to static, leaving them alone on the bridge. Lirien stared at him, her violet eyes wide with something that looked like awe. "You could have been rich," she said softly. Dexter turned to face her fully, his weathered features serious. "I've got everything I need right here." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Without conscious thought, she moved closer, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat through the worn fabric of his shirt, strong and steady and utterly human. "Dexter," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotions she'd spent a lifetime learning to suppress. He reached up to cup her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs tracing the delicate curve of her cheekbones. Her skin blazed with warmth where he touched her, painting them both in soft, golden light. "I meant what I said before," he murmured, his voice rough with desire. "I will never let them hurt you." The space between them seemed to disappear. Lirien found herself pressed against his chest, her hands fisting in his shirt as she looked up into his green eyes. The heat building between them was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, raw, desperate, utterly consuming. Then the ship's sensors chimed with an incoming transmission, and the moment shattered like crystal. "This is Captain Gorvac," came the pirate's gravelly voice. "We have you surrounded. Surrender the princess, or we will take her from your wreckage." Dexter swore under his breath, pulling away from Lirien and slamming his fist on the console. "Damn it! How did they find us again?" Lirien's eyes widened as a chilling realization dawned on her. "The Vaelari ship, Thalon's vessel. It must have a high-frequency tracking beacon, something designed to penetrate even deep space and asteroid fields. My brother would have ensured it." "A Vaelari tracking beacon?" Dexter muttered, his mind racing. "That's why they kept finding us. It's not about the Wisp's signature, it's about yours." He looked at her, his expression grim. "We can't outrun them, not with that thing on our tail." "What do we do?" Lirien asked, her voice tight with fear. Her skin flickered with a frantic, pulsing light. Dexter's gaze swept around the cramped bridge, then settled on the makeshift control panel he'd used to rig the life support. An idea, wild and reckless, sparked in his eyes. "We don't outrun them. We make them regret ever finding us." He began furiously working the controls, his fingers flying across the salvaged components. "Lirien, I need you to do something for me. Something that might seem crazy." "Anything," she said, her voice firm despite the fear. She trusted him implicitly. "Your pod," Dexter said, gesturing to the still-docked Vaelari escape pod. "It's still linked to the Wisp's power, right? And it's Vaelari tech, designed for long-range distress signals." Lirien nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Yes, but it's heavily damaged. Its primary systems are failing. Perfect, Dexter grinned, a dangerous glint in his eyes. We're going to turn that distress beacon into a trap, a very, very loud trap. He began rerouting power, diverting energy from non-essential systems on the stellar wisp into the escape pod. The pod, still attached, hummed with renewed power, its bioluminescent panels flaring brighter than before. The Vaelari distress beacon, Lirien explained, her voice quickening with comprehension. It's designed to broadcast across vast distances, to pierce through interference. It uses a unique harmonic frequency that only Vaelari long-range scanners can truly pinpoint. Exactly, Dexter said, his eyes fixed on the power conduits. And we're going to overload it, turn that pinpoint signal into a planetary-scale EMP. Lirien gasped. An electromagnetic pulse? But that would disable every ship in range, including ours. Not if we time it right, Dexter said, his brow furrowed in concentration. And not if we've got a little human ingenuity on our side. He pulled out a small, battered device from a compartment, a relic from his early salvaging days, designed to create a localized directional EMP burst. This little beauty can give us a few precious seconds of immunity if I can rig it to the Wisp's main power core. He worked with a frantic urgency, splicing wires, bypassing safety protocols, and pushing the Stellar Wisp systems to their absolute limits. Lirien watched, mesmerized by his raw skill and audacious courage. Her skin glowed with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "They're hailing us again," Lirien warned, pointing at the comms panel. "Ignore them," Dexter snapped, his focus absolute. "Almost there, just a little more juice." The Vaelari escape pod began to vibrate violently, its organic shell pulsing with an ominous building energy. The air in the Stellar Wisp's bridge crackled with static electricity. "Now!" Dexter roared, slamming his hand down on a jury-rigged lever. A blinding flash of light erupted from the escape pod, followed by a silent, invisible wave of energy that rippled outwards. On the sensor display, the 3 pirate ships and Thalen's Vaelari vessel flickered, then went completely dark. Their engine signatures vanished, their weapon systems flatlined. They were dead in the water. The Stellar Wisp bucked violently as the EMP washed over her, but Dexter's hastily rigged localized field held. Lights flickered, consoles sparked, but the essential systems remained operational. Silence descended on the bridge, broken only by the hum of the Stellar Wisp's strained engines and the ragged sound of their breathing. "Did it work?" Lirien whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Dexter slumped back in his chair, a tired but triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Oh, it worked, Princess. It worked beautifully. They won't be bothering anyone for a long, long time." He looked at the sensor display. The Vaelari ship, though disabled, was still intact. "Thalen's still out there, but he's not going anywhere fast. Neither are the pirates." "What now?" Lirien asked, looking at the disabled ships. "We can't just leave them." "No," Dexter agreed, his grin fading slightly. "But we also can't just waltz into Vaelari space with their lost princess and expect a parade. Your brother has too many allies." "Then we go to the free worlds," Lirien declared, her eyes blazing with newfound resolve. "There are independent systems outside the Empire's reach where justice still holds sway. We gather allies, we expose Valdris's treachery, and we reclaim my throne." Dexter looked at her, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. This wasn't just a scared princess anymore. This was a queen in the making. "That's a tall order, Princess. You'll need more than just a salvage freighter and a human pilot." "I have you," Lirien said simply, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. Her skin glowed with a steady, determined light. "And together we are more than enough." He looked at her hand on his arm, then up into her luminous violet eyes. The journey ahead would be perilous, filled with dangers far greater than anything they had faced so far. But with Lirien by his side, the thought of it no longer seemed daunting. It felt like an adventure. "All right, Princess," Dexter said, his cocky grin returning, full of genuine warmth this time. "Let's go shake up an empire." He set a course for the nearest free world outpost, a small, independent station known for its neutrality and its surprisingly well-connected information brokers. The Stellar Wisp, battered but unbowed, hummed with renewed purpose as she left the wreckage of the battle behind. Over the next few months, the Stellar Wisp became the unlikely flagship of a growing rebellion. Dexter, with his uncanny ability to improvise and adapt, became Lirien's most trusted advisor and strategist. He used his network of contacts in the Fringe, the very people Marcus had tried to exploit, to gather intelligence and resources. His reputation as the human who dared to defy a Vaelari prince spread like wildfire, drawing in disaffected merchants, disillusioned mercenaries, and even a few minor Vaelari nobles who secretly despised Valdris's tyrannical rule. Lirien, meanwhile, proved to be a natural leader. Her regal bearing, combined with the raw courage and resilience she'd learned from her ordeal, inspired fierce loyalty. She spoke of justice, of reclaiming the Vaelari ideals of honor and truth, and her words resonated deeply with those who had suffered under Valdris's oppressive regime. Her luminescence, once a betrayer of her emotions, became a beacon of hope, shining brightest when she addressed her growing coalition. Their journey was not without its challenges. They evaded more syndicate patrols, outwitted Valdris's spies, and even survived a direct assassination attempt orchestrated by cousin Thalon, who, having repaired his ship, was now obsessed with eliminating Lirien personally. Dexter's ingenuity and Lirien's strategic mind became a formidable combination. During one particularly close call, Dexter, with Lirien at his side, used a nebula's unstable gas pockets to create a series of localized explosions that not only crippled Thalon's ship, but also sent him drifting helplessly into a black hole, finally tying up that loose end. The bond between Dexter and Lirien deepened with every shared danger, every whispered conversation under the stars, every moment of quiet understanding. The initial spark of attraction had blossomed into something profound, a love that transcended species and status. Their touches became more frequent, more lingering, and the warmth of Lirien's glow against his skin became a comforting constant. Finally, after nearly a year of relentless campaigning, they stood at the head of a small but dedicated fleet, composed of salvage freighters, modified transports, and a handful of older Vaelari warships whose captains had defected to Lirien's cause. Their destination, the Vaelari homeworld, the heart of the Empire. The battle for the capital was fierce. Valdris had fortified the planet's defenses, expecting an attack. But he hadn't accounted for Dexter's unconventional tactics. While the main rebel fleet engaged the Vaelari defense grid, Dexter, piloting the Stellar Wisp with Lirien by his side, executed a daring low-altitude atmospheric entry using the planet's own weather systems as cover. They bypassed the orbital defenses, streaking through turbulent storms and dense cloud cover, a ghost in the Vaelari's sophisticated sensor net. Their target, the Imperial Palace, where Valdris held court. "This is it, Princess," Dexter said, his voice tight with anticipation as the Stellar Wisp broke through the clouds, revealing the gleaming spires of the Vaelari capital city below. "No turning back now." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Lirien replied, her skin blazing with pure white determination. She looked at him, her violet eyes filled with a love that made his heart swell. "Thank you, Dexter, for everything." He grinned, a flash of his old cocky charm. "Just doing my job, Your Highness." They landed the Stellar Wisp in the palace's main courtyard amidst chaos and alarm. Valdris's personal guard, caught off guard by the unexpected breach, rushed to confront them. But they were no match for Dexter's raw human ferocity, honed by years of surviving the Fringe. He moved with brutal efficiency, using salvaged energy weapons and his own formidable combat skills to clear a path. Lirien, meanwhile, faced her brother. Valdris, flanked by his remaining loyalists, sneered at her. "You truly believe this crude human can save you, sister? You are a fool." "He saved me when you abandoned me," Lirien retorted, her voice ringing with authority. "He showed me what true honor means, something you clearly forgot." The confrontation was swift. Valdris, overconfident and unprepared for Lirien's newfound strength, fell before her, his cold luminescence fading as he was stripped of his power. The Loyalists, seeing their leader defeated, quickly surrendered. In the aftermath, as the Vaelari people celebrated the return of their true princess, Lirien faced a new challenge: rebuilding an empire shattered by betrayal. She ruled with wisdom and compassion, guided by the lessons she'd learned from Dexter. She abolished the rigid social structures that had allowed corruption to fester, opened diplomatic relations with species previously deemed primitive, and began to heal the wounds of her people. And by her side always was Dexter. He never sought a title or a position of power, preferring to remain her unofficial advisor, her pilot, and her confidant. He still flew the Stellar Wisp on occasion, indulging his love for salvage and exploration, but he always returned to Lirien, to the home they had built together. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the gleaming Vaelari capital, Lirien leaned her head on Dexter's shoulder, her skin glowing softly in the twilight. "The Empire is strong again," she murmured, "stronger than it ever was under Valdris, and it's all thanks to you, Dexter." He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "Nah, Princess, it's thanks to you. You were always meant to rule. I just helped you get there." "And what about you, my rogue human?" she asked, looking up at him, her violet eyes sparkling. "What will you do now?" Dexter looked out at the stars, then back at her, his green eyes filled with a warmth that made her luminescence pulse with contentment. "Me? I think I'll stick around. Someone's got to keep this queen out of trouble. Besides," he added, a mischievous glint in his eye, "I hear there's still a lot of uncharted space out there, and I've got a feeling our adventures are just beginning." Lirien smiled, a radiant, joyful smile that lit up the night. She knew he wasn't talking about uncharted space anymore. He was talking about their future, together, an uncharted journey of their own. And for the first time in her life, Princess Lirien, Queen of the Vaelari, felt truly, completely at home. The Stellar Wisp, once a solitary vessel, had found its true purpose, carrying not just salvage but hope, love, and the promise of a new, brighter future for an entire empire.